Welcome back to my channel. I'm Traben, and this is my end of the year book tag. Now there are a couple of different lists running around. I've seen some videos with various questions, and so I kind of did mostly one set that I saw, but there were a few from another video that I'm going to take and pull in here at the end. I've read over 200 books this year, so I'm putting a couple of different books in each category. Most of the categories, I tried to hold that back to one book and one comic, but with some, there were just a variety of ways I could answer the question, and so put in some different things. I also tried my best not to have too many titles double up in multiple categories, although there will be some repeats from my mid-year freakout tag video. We're going to start off with question number 1, which is, what is the best book of the year for you? Kick it off right away with my favorite books of the year, and for the novel of the year, I'm going to go with Kay Sinclair's House of Frank. House of Frank tells the story of Saika, a witch who is dealing with the recent loss of her sister and has been traveling around for a while before finally landing at the House of Frank, where her sister wanted her ashes placed into this arboretum, this magical arboretum that they have. It deals a lot with found family, which is a trope that I very much identify with, and really hit me emotionally with its look at several different types of grief. Its meditations on grief in this fantasy setting were very touching and very poignant for me, and so that is why it gets my #1 spot for this year. Most of the titles in this tag are going to have full-length video reviews because they're usually things that I felt strongly enough to make a video on, and so I do have a full review of House of Frank if that's something you're interested in looking into. I also have a full review for my comic book of the year, which I'm giving to Somna. This is a Salem witch trial-esque demon possession story, maybe. It's very ambiguous. It utilized its art in a very evocative way to switch between the real world and a dream world, but then as the book goes on, those lines start to blur, and there are parts where it looks like the dream world, but people are saying that she's awake, or it looks like the waking world, but it's clearly a dream. And playing with that, subverting that reality, giving that perspective, that skewed perspective to the reader, makes this book very strong and makes the end open to a number of interpretations. So this is definitely adult, so I would not recommend this to kids. Again, there is a full review on my channel for this. It comes highly recommended from me. 5 stars. I think it was one of the most powerful things I read this year. Question number 2 is, are there any new releases that could potentially hit your list that you're not going to be able to touch on this year? And for me, that's going to be Wind and Truth. This is actually the last book I'm buying before my book ban. I'm on page 1000 of 1300, so I'm pretty far through. I don't feel like this is going to be a title that blows me away so far, but Sanderson is known for these epic, crazy endings, and so it's entirely possible. We shall see. I do intend on having a review for this one up as soon as I can get it finished. Potentially this could have hit something on the list, and is something I'm currently working through. Question number 3 is, what is your most anticipated release for 2025? And for me, that's going to be A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping by Sangu Mandana. This book is one that I've been anticipating pretty much all year. When I first looked this up at the end of 2023 for potential titles for my 24 for 2024 challenge, it was set to release in, I think, January or February, somewhere in there. And then it got pushed back to the summer, and then it got pushed back to December, and then it got pushed back to February. And currently, I believe it is set to release on July 15th of next year. I don't know if that's actually going to happen. At the rate they're going now, it's anyone's guess where it's ultimately going to land, but I really hope this one comes out. This is the same author who did Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, which I read last year and really enjoyed. A low-stakes romantasy that I really enjoyed reading and am excited to get another title from this author. My biggest disappointment this year is thankfully one that I did not buy physically. It is There's No Way I'd Die First, which I only listened to in audiobook. Ooh, this one was rough. I did not DNF this book, although perhaps I should have. But a combination of a morbid curiosity mixed with just hate reading it got me to the end of the title. This book purports to be about a girl who is a horror hound. She watches a lot of horror movies. She thinks she'd be so good at surviving them. And then she gets into this really preposterous, like movie-esque situation where there's this killer clown terrorizing her house and all of her friends. And she proceeds to make all the classic stupid decisions that she can. It could have been fun in kind of this like cathartic way of like, oh, look at all these people like getting their comeuppance because they think they're so clever. But the theming and the messaging is also kind of terrible. It is like pro 1%, like against the 99%. The main villain is saying that his this attack on these random teens is an extension of Occupy Wall Street, and it was just like, what are you talking about? So there was just nothing redeeming about this. I gave it 2 stars. I don't see how someone could find this entertaining. I don't see how someone could find this fun. That was my most disappointing one, unfortunately. Question number 5 is, what were your biggest surprises of this year? What were things that you weren't expecting? And again, I have a book and a comic to talk about. The book is Mushroom Blues by Adrian M. Gibson. So this is a book that is labeled as fungal punk. I initially heard about this from Daniel Green's Fantasy News, I believe, and just hearing that genre description was enough for me to be like, I'm on board. I'm going to pick up this book and see what it's about. And I really thought this was just going to be like kind of a funny haha, like ridiculous, entertaining thing. Actually, a lot more than that. It is a decent like noir detective fiction story, also couched in this allegory of post-World War II occupied Japan, which I found just deeply fascinating as someone who is interested in Japanese history and Japanese culture. Seeing how the mushroom people in this story are meant to be kind of a stand-in for that. And this is going to sound a little strange, but I also really enjoyed that our main character is, at the onset, kind of an unabashed racist. It's refreshing to not have your POV character be like the bastion of civil rights and justice and doing what's right, and instead seeing them actually struggle with their convictions and with their worldview when faced with the reality of the humanity of the people that they're so dismissive of. So I found that all that very well handled within the book, and it was also a very entertaining read. So yeah, check it out, Mushroom Blues. I also have a review for this one on my channel, so take a look at that if you're interested in hearing my extended thoughts on this title. Second biggest surprise for this year is the fact that Witch Hat Atelier won my manga tournament earlier this year. So I set up a bracket style manga tournament to determine my next binge read. I had just recently caught up with all of One Piece. I read all of that last year over the course of several months and was looking for some new titles to kind of revitalize my interest in the manga scene. I really thought when I was reading through the initial titles that Chainsaw Man was going to take it. It was doing so much with characterization and world building and action. It was giving me those feelings of reading those old shonen series like early One Piece or Bleach. But Witch Hat ended up taking it by, I think, a single point in the last round. It was very, very close. This is arguably the most progressive manga being put out on the market that I'm aware of right now. There is so much inclusivity in here, so much representation, and it's not done in a way where they like shove it in your face. There is a gay couple in here. Nobody makes mention of it as being anything of particular interest or anything that they really need to talk about. At least two characters who are paraplegic, and one is one of the strongest sorcerers on the planet. Nobody makes a big deal about it. He can compensate with magic. I also found the theming in this one really strong with the morality of both the heroes and the villains, the protagonists and antagonists being shades of gray. Like, there are some terrible things that the supposed good guys do and are very questionable actions. And there are some arguments made by the antagonists that are decent arguments. They are things that really make Coco, the protagonist, the main character, question what she is going through and what decisions she's making, and is she doing the right things? Is it worth doing good things through bad means? These are very complicated adult themes and questions being posed in here. I think it's listed as seinen, which means it's meant for adults. It's not a shonen series, although in Japan apparently its popularity is across the board. I imagine the same is true in the States. It is an amazing comic, and the art is phenomenal. Like, intricate line work everywhere, costumes, even the paneling is insane. So if you've not checked out Witch Hat Atelier, if you are a fan of manga in any way or just looking to kind of dabble in that space, this is an excellent one to pick up. And I have several videos that you could go and look at if you want to get my thoughts on particular volumes as I was reading through the initial ones in that bracket, to a full-on review as I got to the end of the series. On to question number 6, which is your favorite new author, like new to you author. And I know I said I didn't want to double up on too many of these titles, but I am going to give this one to Kay Sinclair. I feel like this was the coziest and easiest to read of the cozy fantasy titles that I looked at this year. It is a genre that I am very much gravitating toward right now. And I felt like, in a similar vein to Witch Hat, that this was able to do some inclusivity and some representation without it being too heavy-handed. So for all of that, as well as crafting just a lovely story with a lot of heartwarming feelings and very moving moments, and not having too many points where the story felt like it was dragging, I think Kay Sinclair is well deserved as my author of the year, my new author of the year. Which brings us to question number 7. Who is your new fictional crush? There was a time where this felt very awkward, and I do still feel like this is a question for like the younger 20-somethings that are inhabiting BookTube, but I will say that this has not gone unchanged since the beginning of the year. It is still Emily Wilde. Having read the second title, I can confirm that she is still as lovely and quirky and enjoyable to read as she was in the first title. Her love of books and her love of knowledge, her social awkwardness are all very endearing, and I know that it's grating for some people, but it just works for me, and I just find her and Wendell's relationship super cute, and it is thankfully moving forward as the stories progress, so that is also a positive for this romance subplot for the series of books. So yes, Emily Wilde, my book crush for this year. Question number 8 is, who is your new favorite character for this year? And I wasn't sure if the one that I really wanted to pick was actually new for this year, so I picked a couple of others just to make sure I'm covering my bases. So we're going to start off with Carl from Dungeon Crawler Carl. This one is definitely new to me this year. Carl, despite being a former Coast Guard officer, is very relatable. He seems like the everyman, walks around in his boxers, and now it's become kind of a gag in the series. I've only read through book 1. His quick wit is very appreciated. His willingness to go along and like push back against the aliens that have invaded our world, and to do so in a way that is entertaining, is, I think, a very strong asset for this book, a very strong point for the title. This is another one that I have a full review for and am looking forward to reading more of in 2025. I believe there are 6 books out, and I believe as I read through the titles, my taste might change. I might start enjoying Princess Donut a little bit more, but I'll say in book 1, I do think I was siding more with Carl and identifying with him a little bit more than I was with Donut, but I hear from fans that Princess Donut, steals the show overall in the books. So a very fun character, very entertaining. This quirky dude who's gotten way in over his head, but is coping as best he can and is very adamantly against what is going on and is willing to fight his way to the top, which are all things that are great to read. Second book for Character of the Year is the one that I'm not sure if it quite counts, and that is Lift from Edge Dancer and also Oathbringer and Rhythm of War, and now Wind and Truth. I say that it might not count because I do believe she shows up in Words of Radiance, and I believe I read that last year. So she was in one of the interlude chapters there. It would have been like a one-off chapter. But Lift is this younger character in this world full of like grizzled old soldiers and like 19-year-old badasses and just people with crazy powers. She has the power of awesomeness, as she calls it, and she uses it to steal food. And just her worldview is so bizarre and so entertaining that I can't help but laugh in the scenes that she shows up in and be rooting for her, despite her relatively short amount of screen time when compared to other people in this sprawling epic. But Edge Dancer was Lift's book, and I really enjoyed a lot of it. I thought the humor landed for me. I know it doesn't for everybody. I have enjoyed seeing her grow and change as much as she hates that is happening. I do look forward to, at the very least, seeing how she changes in the second arc of Stormlight Archives, because that's going to take place 10 years later, and I have every confidence that she is going to be one of our primary point of view characters, one of our carryovers from this first stretch of novels. And finally, because I wanted to get a comic book one in as well, I'm going to say Akane from Akane Banashi is another one of my favorite characters. Akane is an aspiring Rakugo performer. Rakugo is the Japanese art of basically storytelling, and I just love the backstory she has where her father was attempting to rise to a certain rank, and everybody in his year, that everybody who was aspiring for that year, were all dismissed and told they can't even be in Rakugo anymore. And she is setting out to prove that her father's Rakugo, her father's style, is worthy of being one of the world-renowned premier Rakugo performers in the world. I really wasn't sure how Rakugo was going to translate into a manga, but every volume has her focusing on some aspect of storytelling that I would otherwise not have clocked as something as important as they demonstrate that it is. From researching the history of her stories to thinking about the tone of her voice, the way that she presents it. Is she trying to play it straight? Is she trying to make it a comedy? The different types of stories she can tell, how she needs to get more experience and more of these stories under her belt, which means working with more people and kind of losing a little bit of that chip on her shoulder that she starts with. Akane is a remarkably complex character, and I've enjoyed seeing her grow even in the short time that she has started off her journey in this art form. Question number 9 is a book that made you cry. And I'm just going to go with generally the Stormlight Archives as a sprawling epic fantasy with characters that have been built up over literally thousands and thousands of pages. There have been some key points within Oathbreaker, within Rhythm of War, and now within Wind and Truth that have really gotten to me. These emotional gut punches that kind of come out of nowhere, especially in Rhythm of War, which I know a lot of people list as one of their least favorite, but is one that I was hoping was turning a corner as far as character development. I thought that there were some really standout moments for the characters as they face the various traumas that they're trying to get over and rise to new levels of power. I felt like all that was very poignant, if arguably a bit predictable. But I've teared up in pretty much every title of this series, so I'm giving it to Stormlight Archives. Question number 10 is, what is a book that makes you happy? And I've got two, both of which are comics this time. The first is Serial, which is a gothic horror based on the cereal mascots of, I believe, the 60s, like Boo Berry and Count Chocula, but also Lucky the Leprechaun from the Lucky Charms, the Fruit Brute, Diggum Frog, General Mills. All these characters are in here, and it's mostly played straight, which I was kind of surprised about. Like I mentioned in my review that they could have just given us puns and that would have been fine. The puns are there, the jokes are there, the sly little references are there, which is a lot of fun, but it's also a very effective gothic horror, like universal black and white film kind of book, and definitely gave me those vibes. So just the combination of like these classic cereal mascots, gothic horror, old school black and white horror films, that's all coming together. It was a great read for me. And I also want to mention Batman Wayne Family Adventures, which is just these heartwarming stories about the Bat family. It works especially well if you are familiar with the different characters. But even if not, I think you can find some value in the family dynamic that is presented here and in the very real explorations of overworking yourself or PTSD. And there are scenes in here where characters are doing the actual things you should do if someone is having an episode, if someone is reliving trauma and you need to get them back to reality. The way it's handled in this comic is incredibly respectful and educational, arguably. When I talk about how I don't feel like adult media is anything more than violence and sex, and how I'd like to see adult content mean more complex theming and a more nuanced handling of the pressures and the stresses that adults face, this is honestly the kind of thing I'm talking about. I don't think that this is adult, like I don't think it's made explicitly for adults, but I believe the way it handles those themes is the kind of thing I'm looking for when I say that adult media still feels very juvenile to me in a lot of cases. Question number 11 is, what is the most beautiful book that you've received this year, you've bought this year? And I've got, again, two that I want to look at. The first are the Emily Wilde covers. Now, we went out of our way to find these particular covers because we love them so much. So we had to wait until the hardcovers kind of phased out, and we got these paperbacks that also have these edges that are cut at different lengths. It gives a really good tactile feeling when you're flipping through the book. These, I think, are my favorite covers of the year. As far as beautiful special editions, I did pick up the Wraith marked Legends and Lattes copy. I kickstarted this. So this is one of my favorite books in recent memory, and just having this special edition with the gilded edges and the interior art is just a really nice thing to have. I am learning that special editions for Legends and Lattes are a dime a dozen. They are apparently very common, and I am picking up a lot of them because I love this book series. If I had to pick one book this year that is like more of a premium quality, I would go with Legends and Lattes. Question number 12 is, are there any titles that you're needing to finish for this year? I am planning on doing a Christmas murder mystery novella vlog once I finish up Wind and Truth. So I have about 4 or 5 titles, all on the short end of mystery books that are holiday themed. It's a thing, apparently. And so I've got to get through those before the end of the year. Bonus question 1 is, are there any books that you started this year and you plan on finishing going into 2025? So I don't DNF books often, but there were a few that I started this year and for various reasons put down and didn't pick back up. So I do want to make it a priority to get those read next year. The first is In Limbo. Now, I'm not sure if this is meant to be autobiographical, but it does seem to be a very genuine look at the protagonist's teen years and their need to fit in with their friends and their family dynamics and things like that. It was a little too heavy for what I wanted out of a comic when I sat down to read it. And so, like I said, I think I set this down one day, didn't pick it back up, and then just moved on to some other stuff. Never got back to it. Definitely going to get this read in 2025. The other title that I'm definitely going to get through in 2025 is Harrow the Ninth, followed by Nona the Ninth. Now, this one, I did start the audiobook, but found the second person narration very distracting and felt like I needed to get my hands on a physical copy and read through it that way. And then it just never happened. There were other titles that were coming up ahead of it. My audiobook lapsed, but I didn't really want to listen to it anyway. So this is one that my friend is reading through right now. I think they're mostly through it. They're going to end up finishing up the series before me, and so I really do want to pick this up in 2025 and get this series finished. I think it's just the 3 books, so get the series finished and get back onto getting this done. And then bonus question number 2 is, what are your plans for 2025? I intend on doing a full video for my 2025 plans, but at least initially in those first few months, I do want to work through my backlog of my Fairy Loot titles. I filmed a video where my wife read the first line of each title to me, and I arranged them by how interested I was based on that first line. And so I will be starting off in January, picking up those books and trying to work through that backlog of YA titles before moving on to other books and other pursuits. So those are the initial plans. I will talk more about that in a future video. And that's going to do it for this video. Thanks for coming by and hanging out with me while I talk about my reads for this year, my big takeaways. I hope your reading journey is going well. I hope you're finding titles that interest you and are showing you new worlds and new experiences, hitting you emotionally, whether you're reading novels or epic series, nonfiction, manga, comic books, whatever it might be, it's all good. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe so we can grow this corner of our BookTube community. And until the next one, take care.